Howie Roseman has until tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time to get this roster down from 90 to 53. He's already busy at work. Before he gets down to 53, though, we have our final roster predictions coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, this Monday edition of the podcast. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host Gino Camilleri. We're brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. The Eagles have until tomorrow at 4 o'clock, as I mentioned, to get down to the 53-man roster. Gino, Howie's already busy at work. Just to recap before we get into our roster predictions, what happened today so far? The Eagles have waived a bunch of players. Wide receiver Austin Watkins, Griffin Herbert. They waived your boy, defensive end Tarron Jackson. Andre Sam was waived as well. Same with tight end Kevin Foelsch. Perry Nickerson at corner, and then another one of your boys from the CGS All-Star game, Shon Stephens, who did have a really nice summer. So not a lot of major surprising moves there, kind of the first wave that makes a lot of sense, but Howie's busy at work.
They've also released a couple of veterans as well. Perry Nickerson, as we had said, Max Scharping as well. Julian Okwara has been released. So they're well on their way, and these are expected type of moves. Right now, I don't think we're going to see decisions on guys like Eli Ricks, let's say a Thomas Booker, let's say Patrick Johnson, Tristan McCollum, until closer to 4 p.m. on Tuesday, because those are moves that you're either, one, looking to try and trade and acquire some sort of compensation. You look around the NFL, players are moving left and right. Your boy Malik Willis, he gets moved to Green Bay for a 7th-round pick. Those are the type of moves that Howie Roseman is always involved in, man. And he's not going to let good players like Eli Ricks and the aforementioned players that I had said just hit the waiver wire without getting something back, or he is going to protect these guys, try and do the old either phantom IR look, which he looks like he's doing with Ainias Smith now.
Ainias Smith suddenly woke up with a bum ankle, which was not the case all summer long, but they're going to stash him, it sounds like.
And then you also have the vested veteran approach where you can stash 4 guys on the practice squad that have played, I believe it's over 3 years. It's anywhere between 3 and 4 years. And those players are not subject to waivers. So you look at Julian Okwara, you look at Oren Burks, you look at Max Scharping, Avonte Maddox even falls
Terrell
into that
Lewis, I believe, will be one of those guys.
Yeah, those older players, they are not going to go through the waiver claims. But when you get into these undrafted free agents over the last couple years, then you have to play the game. Where do we fall on the waiver wire? Do we believe that another team around the NFL is going to go and claim that player if they have a weakness? And looking at the Eagles roster, how deep it is, Lou, some of these guys, they're going to find homes elsewhere on 53s, but it comes at the Eagles having to break some hearts, man. It's tough, especially after that 3rd preseason game where a lot of guys started to find their footing. Players like Paris Campbell, who had not played up until that moment. We already mentioned Okwara, Burks, those type of guys. It's a loaded roster, man. So there's going to be some tough decisions, but at the end of the day, these are the ones that you want to make, right? And I believe we had talked about it. This has got to be the hardest 53-man roster in our entire tenure here.
Because it's such a young team, and the variance has been so high and low. Players have had great weeks, and then they've kind of disappeared, and it's hard to decide, do you go younger at this position? Do we believe in the development of this guy? Should we keep the veteran that can help you right away? It's a much different team than in years past. You knew when the window was right now. It's an older team. You're probably going to go with the veteran, and most of the time you knew what you had on those players, whereas this year it's been such an evaluation period more than we've seen in recent years on this podcast. So every time we've done this 53-man roster predictions, it feels like all summer it's looked very different. Whereas in years past, it's kind of looked the same every single show we do it.
Yeah, I felt like for a while, especially in those Doug Peterson years, it's like you could kind of
rinse
and repeat who was going to be on the roster, right? But with this one and this new evolution of Howie Roseman, where he's going away from those 2018, 2019 years where he kept a more veteran group at the cornerback position where you kept guys like Cravon LeBlanc and Ronald Darby, and they took minutes away from some of those younger guys. But I think Howie Roseman is starting to realize if we keep these younger guys, especially with how much money we've invested at the top, we not only have cost-controlled players for multiple years, we have good young players that we know it's going to be a future element that we are going to get out of, rather than some of these veterans where maybe their best days are behind them. So I think keeping the youth is the way to go, especially when you're getting down to who's that 51st, 52nd, 53rd guy. If it's a veteran you have on a 1-year deal or a potential rookie that you could keep for 2 to 3 more years, I got to say Howie Roseman is going closer to the latter on that category.
Do you think it's likely that some players from other teams are going to end up on this 53? How set do you feel like it is where the big decisions are going to come from player A on the Eagles versus player B? Or is it player A versus, hey, let's trade for a guy. Let's trade for a tight end. Let's trade James Bradberry away or an Eli Ricks and find a pick or a player. I do wonder, and I think at least one of those things will happen tomorrow where you're trading for a player or trading a player away. I do just wonder how comfortable they are, Gino, with the guys, like the decision process. Is it just one player on the team versus another, or how serious they really are surveying the league?
I think you're set everywhere outside of tight end.
I agree. That's the place you might look to find somebody. I agree.
If they have their eyes honed in on somebody that they have done their work on and the pro personnel department has a pretty high grade on, and they're saying, oh, this guy is an outlier, we don't want him to hit waivers, but we know the team is going to release him. Maybe we send a 6. Maybe we send a future 7 now that you don't have a 2025 7th round pick any longer. But I believe that if you were to add a player, it comes after the cut down period. You put in a couple waiver claims. It probably comes at the tight end position. That's the one big glaring weakness. But if you're going to send somebody away and try to acquire some sort of asset, I mean, statistically, it has to come from the defensive backfield just because of how many guys you have.
It's got to be, to me, 3 players. It's got to be Ricks, Bradberry, or Job, I would say.
Yeah, if somebody values Josh Job and he has past starting experience and they
special
love who
teams
he is
ability.
As a special teams guy.
Yeah.
And it's no fault of these players. Like, these are the 55th, 56th, 57th guys on the roster when you're talking about it. But when you have young investments in Keely Ringo and you signed Isaiah Rodgers and Eli Ricks has just continued to play well and Quinyon Mitchell is the future, it's tough to keep some of these guys as opposed to some of the other positions where, hey, we might be a little lighter at tight end. You were just waiting for somebody to take that opportunity, but it never came about. Whereas opposed to corner, that's one of the positions where, hey, those guys are good enough to make a 53. Patrick Johnson at the edge, who's probably one of those first 4 in, last 4 out type of guys, he's going to make a 53. Thomas Booker is going to make a 53.
Yeah.
The Eagles have a very good roster. And when you look at the NFL, it's pretty similar year to year, Lou. There's like 12 very good teams. There's about 12 that are in the middle, and then there's 12 that are just trying to acquire talent and get ready for the future. You're telling me that at least 10 to 12 to 15 teams couldn't use a Patrick Johnson or a Thomas Booker or a Josh Job type of player? And that's where Howie Roseman has to just work the phones. And that's why you're going to probably see the roster release not at 4. It's going to be probably like a half hour after, and they're going to keep us on our toes with that official.
Yeah, I was going to say, if a player makes it right before that, that doesn't mean they're safe. There can be moves that happen right after, and I imagine tomorrow will be pretty eventful for this football team. But overall, I think the roster is pretty set. I feel like I'm pretty comfortable with who makes it where. We'll get into that coming up next as we predict one last time the Eagles 2024 roster. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're brought to you today by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They have the tools to help you find everybody faster and for free. It's not just a job board. They help you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't exactly searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users, they don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses, they get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, make sure your second listen is the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to predict the Eagles 53-man roster one final time. Howie's got to get to 53 by tomorrow at 4 p.m., but like Gino said in segment 1, we'll hear a lot of moves happen before that. They'll be pretty much set up before that deadline. They're already making a ton of moves. They've waived a bunch of young players. A lot of vested veterans have been released, like Julian Okwara. See who will make this practice squad, but a lot of these guys will probably catch on with other teams. So, Gino, let's get into this. It's time to predict the roster. Lou. Yeah, go ahead.
Zach McPherson from his Twitter account.
He's gone.
Thank you, Philly. Much love with the green
Not
heart.
a surprise. Didn't have a great summer coming off that injury.
To see, man.
Sucks,
he's just had a lot of injuries that are kind of...
And it's a numbers game. There's too many corners, so we expect McPherson. But there we go. There's another guy gone. Let's get into the offensive side first. I think, Gino, there's less questions here. It feels pretty set in stone on that side. Yeah. Most of the questions, I think, or at least the tough decisions that I've had predicting this roster have come on defense. We'll start at quarterback. I think it's obvious. It's Jalen Hurts, Kenny Pickett, and Tanner McKee.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where you just toss the ticket in the box. You already know what you're going to get onto the future.
Running back, I feel like it's the same thing. Like what I saw from Kendall Milton this summer and Lou Nichols. Get maybe one of those guys in the practice squad, but overall it's Saquon Barkley, Will Shipley, and Kenneth Gainwell.
I think you have to feel good about the depth. If you were to have to elevate one of those guys, I think you'll probably be able to get two of the three, Lou Nichols, Tyrion Davis-Price, and Kendall Milton onto your practice squad. And I thought all of them looked really good and explosive in the minutes that they did have. But when you have the three set in stone the way you do on the roster already, Will Shipley, maybe the surprise of the bunch so far, how quickly he has come along.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what Shipley did this year.
He's going to be incorporated to this offense very quickly. Kenny Gainwell is a Howie Roseman gem, and Saquon. Can you believe that we're going to be able to actually watch him running the football in a couple weeks, dude?
No, 100%. All right, we talked about this before the show, and I think we might take a different route at receiver because Anaya Smith, like this ankle injury kind of came out of nowhere. He was completely healthy during the game. It makes sense. They love to keep their draft picks even early on if they don't come out guns a-blazing. And he did not have a great summer, but had a pretty solid final 2 weeks of the summer, built up some confidence, started to make some plays after that 2-point conversion, made a couple nice plays in space against Minnesota on Saturday. But it sounds like they want to stash him on the Phantom IR, let him develop this year, see if he looks more explosive and more pro-ready next year. So with Anias, because, Gino, I thought the debate would be, okay, there's 5 guys locked in, right? It's A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. You've got Jahan Dotson now. It's Jahan Dotson. I've been saying
you pronounce his name different every single time.
I know, and it drives listeners wrong. Nuts. But it's Jahan Dotson. I'll get there.
There we go.
Britton Covey's locked in as your main returner. Love the strides he took this year as a possession slot receiver in the summer. And then Johnny Wilson's your 5th.
Yeah.
I thought it would be Paris Campbell versus Anaya Smith. Smith, it sounds like, will be on IR. Gino, do you think it's worth keeping Campbell, or do you go light at receiver, keep 5, so you can keep some extra defensive players?
I'm not going to change my decision on Paris Campbell because of Anaya Smith. And we did this earlier today. You and I were talking about it. We were going back and forth. We were saying, like, is Anais a guy you keep Paris Campbell as one of those vested veterans? And that's the route I took. I think you go with the 5. I think there are good young players on the offensive line, on the defensive line that you might want to keep instead of a Paris Campbell. And he knows his role, right? Him and Nick Sirianni have a good relationship. I'm sure they've talked about it that, hey, if this does come about and we do get a guy via a trade, and even kind of mentioned it, broke the fourth wall a couple days ago when he talked about in his press conference that he knew what the situation was.
Yeah, you got to stay healthy, man. And I think, Gino, I like Campbell, and I'd be okay if he is the number 6. Like, that's a pretty good problem to have. But I think even if he signed on with another team, like, you could probably get John Ross as one of those vested veterans. And I don't think the drop-off is really that significant, where if you need your 6th guy that bad, they'll probably be fine with Ross versus Campbell. So I wasn't thinking of it this way, but this might help you keep, there's like a debate about an edge rusher versus an inside linebacker. This might allow you to keep both by going a little lighter at pass catcher. I think we're going to do the same thing at tight end. Like, I don't believe behind Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra, anybody earned a spot. CJ Uzoma was already released. Albert O did nothing this summer. And then EJ, I was really looking forward to that opportunity he had Saturday, and I just thought he kind of blew it.
And not just that, Lou. I think there have been 2 players already released, one by Chicago, one by Miami. Chicago released Tommy Sweeney, who I've been a big
Right.
of since his days in
Yeah, these are
Buffalo.
initial predictions, Gino. Like
Yeah.
they can add another tight end from another team. For
Yeah,
sure.
and like a Jody Fortson who just got released from Miami, who played meaningful minutes for Kansas City. Like you're just begging for one of these veteran type of players like an Albert O or a CJ Uzama to step up, and none of them did in their time over the last couple weeks. CJ Uzama already got cut. I don't think Albert O is going to be long for Philadelphia. The only one that really pushed the envelope was EJ Jenkins. But if you're going to be that third guy, you have to be able to be a reliable blocker in the run game. He's still developing in that regard. Had shown some things as a pass catcher, but moving from wide receiver, putting on that weight, having to figure out how to be a run blocker, that's a perfect practice squad candidate. But I go with 2 right now, Lou, because there are so many other players at other positions that if you're saying EJ Jenkins, who might be like the 60th or 62nd best player, are we going to keep him over somebody we value as like the 48th or 49th best player?
And I think they probably will carry 3 tight ends the majority of the season. But like you said, like it's not on this team right now. I just can't predict.
It's going to be that elevation route where they did it with Richard Rodgers, and they find just a whole bunch of veterans that they call up on game day and cycle them through. And if one sticks, they'll stick, but not any of them is stuck yet, man. It was a gross summer for this. It was a
gross summer tight end, which we kind of saw coming once they didn't draft somebody. So that's tight end, keeping light pass catchers. Only 7 total, 5 receivers, 2 tight ends, but I think that's going to help us in the long run on defense. Gino, when it comes to the offensive line, got our starting 5, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Mekhi Becton at right guard, Lane Johnson at right tackle. There's 5. I think we've got Tyler Steen maybe could start on the pup. I think he'll be playing. He'll be on
I think Anaya Smith made our decision on that one. Yes. You and I were talking about he could be one of those guys that with that ankle injury, does he potentially start, like you said, on the PUP? But now with Anaya Smith, he's got to make the team.
And he'll probably be your top swing player at tackle and guard.
Yep.
Fred Johnson. Fred Johnson's one of your primary tackle backups. We're at 7. Trevor Keegan definitely earned a spot on this roster. He was great this year. And I think, Gino, if you want to keep like a more traditional center backup, Dylan McMahon made a lot of strides, especially at the end of the preseason, has that elite raw athletic score, a draft pick that Howie normally likes to keep draft picks on the roster year one. I think McMahon earned himself a spot on this team, and I think Darian Kennard did too. So if it was up to me, I'd keep those 10 linemen. Do you have any disagreements there?
Brett Toth is the only one that I'm saying like he might because of the 3 position versatility, but I'm with you. Is he going to be the next center up if Cam Jurgens goes down? I would not want that situation to be. I would want it to be somebody with a similar athletic profile, similar body makeup. That's Dylan McMahon, right? They kind of draft these guys, and Jeff Stoutland has talked about it at right guard. They want that Brandon Brooks type of player. Why a Trevor Keegan does really well there, and why you have Tyler Steen and Mekhi Becton. You got these big old bruisers, but then the center position, Lou, they want this guy who can get up to the second level and really lead as an athletic type of offensive lineman and let the rest of the guys do the bruising, right? And to me, Dylan McMahon is that guy over a Brett Toth. I go with those 10, and man, Darian Kennard, good for him, dude. He played nearly every single snap this preseason. I think that's exactly the type of player, if you're looking to make a roster in a team like Philadelphia, that's what you do. You come in, have a great summer, buy into what the coach is selling, and hey, that's how you get on this 53. And they're looking pretty good, man. Like there were questions from, I think, media outside of Philadelphia about the depth here. Dude, they're so set at this position. Like I think there are 4 or 5 guys that we mentioned that would start on other teams any day.
Yeah, I'm happy with the depth. It's young, but it's so hard to have 7+ good offensive linemen on a roster.
Oh, yeah.
And the Eagles have a lot of promise, and that's all you can ask for when you have such elite players in your starting lineup. So overall, we kept 23 offensive players. Got to count our 3 special teamers as well. Jake Elliott, Braden Mann, and Rick Lovato. So, Gino, we're at 26. So we've got 27 spots. Right? Am I doing my math right? 27 for the defensive side of the ball? You're the accountant here.
So 26.
What's 53 minus 26?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we got 27.
13,
we got 27 spots to predict. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, our final 53-man roster prediction.
This episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. You heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we're going to talk a little something different today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. You don't have until next Sunday if you're an Eagles fan. You got to get in on the action because they play next Friday night. And if you're an out-of-towner like me living here in Denver, I got to rely on YouTube TV and the Sunday NFL Ticket. And you can too by simply betting $5 at FanDuel. Then with the YouTube base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account, current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook today.
All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles with our final 53-man roster predictions. Howie Roseman has until 4 o'clock tomorrow to do this exact thing himself. He's already busy at work. Gino, to recap the offense, we kept 23 players overall, 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 5 receivers, and 2 tight ends. So we went lighter at pass catcher. 10 offensive linemen, so 23 overall, plus 3 special teamers. We're at 26 players total. We've got 27 spots left of the defense. I like that we left some wiggle room here because when you look at the edge spot, defensive tackle, linebacker, I mean, I'm about to list every position. There's at the bottom of each spot, there's some really tough calls. Like, do we keep this number 6 corner or this 5th inside linebacker or this number 6 edge rusher? Now that we went lighter on offense, I think we might be able to have our cake and eat it too with some of these decisions.
And the thing is, if you follow Howie Roseman and what he's done over his career, I mean, he just loves getting a lot of defensive linemen. Every single coordinator they bring in is somebody who loves to rotate those guys through. Vic Fangio said he likes to keep 6 to 7 guys that are not considered edge rushers.
Hand in the dirt linemen, yeah.
Yeah, so you're talking about, potentially 12 guys in the defensive line rotation? And then
it's going to be heavy.
And then you look at how many defensive backs they can rotate through as well, Lou. But the Ainias Smith phantom injury, the lack of a tight end 3, Howie Roseman has to be thinking the same thing. Like, we got to protect these defensive investments because look at last year, Lou. They did not have the depth. Now you're saying, oh, these guys actually can play, and we do have the depth. We have to protect it one way or another.
So let's start up front in the trenches. I agree, Gino. I think this is going to be 11, 12 plus. Like, they're going to go heavy here. And there was one tough debate. I'm like, at edge, there's 5 guys set in stone. It always feels like there's 5 guys locked in at each spot. And for this, it's the same. Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Brandon Graham, Jalix Hunt. Those are your 5. All 5 are going to play. Hunt had a great summer. He's a lot more ready to go in his rookie year than we initially thought. Yeah, so that's your top 5. And I thought, they've had Patrick Johnson on this roster for years. He's been a top-tier special teams player for you. He's got another year on this contract. He had a great summer. But I thought there's only like 1 or 2 spots for him, a Thomas Booker, a Ben Van Sumeren. But because we only took 7 pass catchers, I think we can afford to have PJ on this team. And he's not clearing. Like, you're not getting this guy back in the practice squad. He's going to be on a 53. So I think we have the room to keep him.
Yeah, at this point, you have to keep him. Because like you had said, he's such a good player in multiple different facets that he can be a stand-up rusher for you. He could potentially play like a weak side linebacker for you at times and cover the flat. And he's a great special teamer, man. And I keep going back to the Super Bowl, man. Like, he played meaningful snaps for you in the biggest game of the season 2 years ago. So somebody is going to pick him up.
And he looks better this year than he has in years past. You know, like his pass rush
He looks
moves,
super healthy, dude. Like, you could tell last year he was
explosive.
banged up at most of the year.
He was winning with a lot of different moves as a pass rusher on the edge, got to the quarterback consistently this preseason, made that game-winning strip sack in the first game against Baltimore. Like, I was really impressed with Patrick Johnson. So overall, I think I was going to keep like a BVS over him and or a Thomas Booker, but I think with the way we have approached this, we can keep him and go heavy like at defensive tackle. I think we can also keep Booker as that 6th guy behind Carter, Davis, Milton, Tuipulotu, and Ajoma.
Ajoma is the correct pronunciation.
Yes, the Eagles released their pronunciations, so it's not Ajomo, it's Ajoma.
This is one position, too, where if Fangio wants to keep 7, I think they would potentially look elsewhere. I don't know if like PJ Mustapher has done enough in there.
No, but maybe like a veteran somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere, maybe a street free agent that they could potentially add on, or some young guy that they did a lot of work on in this pre-draft process that Fangio loves. But I think the 6 that you're going with, Lou, you have 4 body types that really fit that 3 tech that plays between the guard and the tackle. And then on the other side of that, you have the 5 tech body type, and that's Jalen Carter. That's Milton Williams. That's Moro Ajomo. That's a Thomas Booker. And then you have the 2 gap, take up space, Jordan Davis, Marlon Tuipulotu. I think they might try and add a 3rd in that regard. But I think you're set with this 6, man. Like, that's a really deep group. Thomas Booker, another guy who earned his way onto this roster, a tweener type of player. Versatility is key, man. Like, these discussions, if you're just a one-dimensional player, I think it was a non-starter for me when I was looking at this roster. Like, if you're a defensive lineman who can only play one single role, non-starter. If you're an outside X receiver like a Joseph Ngata, for example, like, non-starter. You have to be versatile in Philly.
I'm really over the moon with how good these young players looked on the interior, because I was skeptical. I think you look at how far Tuipulotu has come in the last 2 years, and Ajomo looked great this summer. Booker was making plays every week. It's very young, but I think they have 6 really reliable, productive players at the spot, and I think a lot of people had question marks about that. Of course, we'll have to see it in the regular season, but I'm really happy with that group right now. And we have the wiggle room now, Gino, I think, at inside linebacker to keep 5. I think you've got 4 in stone, right? Devin White, Nakobe Dean, Zach Bond, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Orion Burks, really impressed with that final game against Minnesota. He's longer and more explosive than I really thought. He looked healthy coming back from that injury. He could be one of those vested veterans, though, if he doesn't catch on anywhere else. Ben Van Sumeren, though, he earned a spot. Like, he was a great special teamer already, and then last week has the highest grade of any defensive player, has an 87.5 coverage grade, gets a sack, was blowing up screen plays. BVS, and he's young. Like, you got to keep this player on the roster.
TJ Edwards 2.0?
Maybe. I mean, we've been trying to say that for Trotter, but maybe it's BVS.
You talk about
and what a cool nickname. I love the abbreviation. I'm going to call him BVS all year.
Oh, yeah. It's way better than Van Sumeren, the Summerin, the discrepancy there. BVS. No, BVS he might have been, if you look at the tape, the best coverage linebacker for you throughout this preseason. You talk about reliability. He was there for you last year when nobody stepped up.
And he was so much better than the scabs you were bringing in, like, Shaq Leonard and like Nicholas Morrow.
He had no athleticism at all, Shaq Leonard, last year. And it was clear, like, maybe Van Sumeren was the best of that group that you had. And he might be the best coverage guy for you, because the other 4, they do really good work working downhill, eyes to the QB. Ben Van Sumeren, though, go watch that tape from that last preseason game. He had some shining moments when it came to coverage, and this is a solid group of linebackers.
It's the best group they've had from top to bottom.
Dude, hats off to Howie for how much he changed this room, like, within a year. And hats off to Nakobe Dean for really being that spark, right? Because his
way to save his career the last few weeks. I mean, not that he was done, but he was on the outs. Spawn was ahead of him. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. looked better.
Yeah, and anybody with eyes can see he's the best.
And then he just dominated the last 2 weeks, where he looks like the best linebacker on the team, which is exactly the scenario we've been wanting to play out for 2 years now.
And I think they rotate a lot of these guys through. I don't think
they're all going to play. Yeah,
one guy is going to play 100%.
Devin White will probably play close to that, but everybody else is going to rotate.
Especially, Lou, as we get into this defensive back consideration.
Which we've got 10 spots here for corner and safety.
What if 43. One of these guys is the green dot and you don't have to rely on the linebackers, so you could really play that committee approach? And
that might be the way they do it, because I don't think Devin White's a green dot.
I think Cooper DeJean could be the future green dot of this football team for a long time.
That's what he looked like on Saturday. I mean, he looked like the perfect nickel safety hybrid player with the way he was run fitting, getting tackles in the red zone in the backfield. Yeah, I agree. It could be Coop. It could be Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. It could be any of these players in the secondary. So, Gino, we've got 10 spots. I think we're keeping 6 corners. I think Eli Ricks did enough to earn that final spot behind Slay, Mitchell, Rogers, Ringo, and DeJean.
You count DeJean as a corner. I always him as a safety. But
that's fair.
He's a nickel coverage guy that
We have to put him in either spot.
You saw his exact role on Sunday. Like he's
exactly what he did on Saturday is what his role is going to be.
Yeah, Saturday, excuse me. Like he's going to line up 10 yards off of the ball, between the hashes, between the numbers. He's going to be that high cover type of guy who's going to carry those slot receivers, those tight ends,
running backs sometimes, maybe
12 to 15 yard out type of areas. He's still got to get his feet underneath him when it comes to the coverage game.
Yeah.
But Lou, there was one play, that tackle in the red zone when they're on the 2-yard line.
2nd and goal. Stood him up. Shed a block too.
Yeah. So he not only shed a block, Lou, how that play was progressing, he carries, I believe it was the tight end, across and delivers him to the linebacker that he is playing with, right? And his momentum is carrying him across the field. Then he puts his foot in the dirt. He maneuvers through that block, as you said, gets low man wins. If you feel confident playing with a linebacker off the field, you have to have a reliable nickel that can tackle. Dude, they might have the best trio of tackling safeties in the league right now. Reed Blankenship, you have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who is just, he's a magnet to the ball. And now you have Cooper DeJean.
And then if Sidney Brown comes back like a rocket downfield. Yeah.
Yeah, if he could figure out how to just hit his landmark.
They're not missing tackles like they were last year in the second half of the season. Like that's a huge plus from this year compared to last year. So there's our 6 at corner. Again, put DeJean wherever you want, but we've got DeJean on this roster. And then the 4 safeties, Gino, I think you agree with this. Gardner-Johnson, Blankenship, Maddox. I think Sidney Brown ends up on the PUP to start. Maybe Bradberry, he didn't play on Saturday. But I don't think you can justify, outside of his name and what he's done in the past, that you can't justify Bradberry being on this team over a Tristan McCullum, who's been great all summer long. Reminds me of kind of what Blankenship was 2 years ago as a rookie, like totally earned a spot on this team. And Bradberry, just think, release him and let him have a bigger role somewhere else.
If I were to hand out the Ja'Cory Shepherd annual award to the best preseason player.
Are you about to do it?
I think Tristan McCollum deserves that award, man.
I agree.
Like, you talk about a guy who we had the discussion, is he a showcase type of player in that last game? Is he a guy that can work his way onto the roster?
I was saying maybe they just really want to see what he can do, and maybe they're trying to keep him on this team.
What a way!
Because they know what they're getting in Bradberry. Like, you know, I was trying to interpret what they were doing with Bradberry. I was like, maybe at first, maybe they have a trade and they're trying to keep him healthy, right? Maybe he's made this roster. But I think they just know what they have in Bradberry, whether or not they cut him or keep him, and they want to get more of an evaluation on McCollum. So I don't know if that decision on Saturday to not play Bradberry indicates one thing or the other based on his future.
Maddox was the one guy who was up in the air for me in terms of the vested veteran status at the safety position.
He was really good, though, in the preseason. I think.
But since we went lighter on offense, I think you got to keep him. But, man, McCollum really showed out and showed you that you're going to have a way better fourth safety than Justin Evans last year, dude. Like, that's such a liability. And, man, you had to go out and make a trade halfway through the year. And we're not even going to name the guy because we're on to bigger and better place right now because this safety group is stacked. The cornerback room is stacked. Thanks to all these guys who put on a show for us, man. Like, we're going to lose some good players. Like, it's unfortunate, but they deservedly had put out some really good tape. Some of these younger guys, but Howie Roseman, he works magic always. So if they are able to keep more than we thought, it wouldn't shock me. But going into the season, you got to feel good at a lot of the positions where they had question marks. Linebackers, they stepped up. A lot of the depth in the secondary, they stepped up. You make a trade at wide receiver. You figure out your offensive line depth. I can't wait for next Friday is all I got to say.
I'm with you. I'm ready for it. This has been fun evaluating this roster, getting it down to 53, but I'm just ready for some regular season football. We'll get to that next week. Howie's got till 4 o'clock tomorrow to get this roster down from 90 to 53. He's already busy at work. We got you covered right here on Locked On Eagles after all the cuts to break down what this team looks like heading into next Friday in Brazil against the Green Bay Packers. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thanks for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.